Hello, everyone. Good morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to this week's session of Market Movers. My name is Pedro, and today we will be discussing one of our favorite topics blockchain games. How is this category reacting to the current bear season, or let's call it how it is, the crypto winter? What are the most relevant trends in the blockchain game space? Because it's not all gloom and doom, there are positive signals that the space is flashing. To discuss the current state of the blockchain gaming space, I want to welcome today's very special guest, Jon Jordan, an old friend here at DappRadar and a true expert and pioneer on blockchain games and investments. How are you doing today, Jon?
Hello. Yes. All good. Just don't look at CoinGecko. It's fine.
Cool, thank you. Just before we start, I want to remind everyone here that, as always, we'll be recording the session so you guys can listen to these or any of our previous shows on that Radar YouTube channel, where you will also find hundreds of educational videos and market updates. Okay, I always want to start with a bit of context, a broader picture of the industry so you people can understand what's really happening on the high level. And then we drill down to discuss the trends that we are shaping out our space. So, despite a complex scenario that has seen prominent altcoins lost up to 90% of their value, and Bitcoin losing the 30K barrier and ETH below 2K price, the game category has been a bright spot in this stormy period. Game dApps registered an all-time high 1.23 million daily unique active wallets during April. So we see a positive trend forming here. Jon, I want to start. What are your takes in this? How have blockchain games been able to sidestep this bear season? Do you see this trend changing in the near future?
Yeah, but I think what we might call the sort of the short-term volatility of the market, which is sort of what we're seeing at the moment. So clearly, what's happening now, with the sort of the exception of what happened with Terra, is really, I think, happening more broadly across kind of all sort of capital markets. So we've seen like a massive, big sort of tech stock sell-off. So this isn't. I would sort of get more worried if this was a sort of specific sort of crypto thing. I mean, we'll see where we end up at the end of today. But in general, I sort of think in the crypto space, it's almost surprising that the sort of collapse of Terra, sort of hasn't been more, hasn't had a sort of a bigger immediate sort of impact, because that was fairly decent sort of chunk of value that basically just literally sort of disappeared in 2 days. I mean, on the game side of things, there are much longer time frame sort of trends going on here. So I would say with the game sort of space, what we're seeing now is really the outworking of sort of what's happened over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. In terms of like funding stuff that's still being announced, that sort of stuff that's again a sort of a trend that's been happening over the last 2 years. I mean, this money sort of is raised by VCs and then gets sort of portioned out to startup game companies, and that's there's a lot of money still in that sort of system, still to be sort of given out. So in one sort of headline manner, I don't think there's going to be any change anytime soon, really. We are still in the fairly early stages of the entire game sector. So whatever a $200 billion annual income entertainment industry is now, transitioning over to some element of using kind of blockchains or Web3, whatever you want to call it. So that sort of change, I think is, I think it may go faster or slower. So there may be some projects that sort of potentially unannounced projects that don't happen now because of what's going on, or can't get the funding that they need. But just the weight of what's been happening over the last, it's last 12 months now since Axie Infinity sort of exploded in sort of June last year. That's not changing. The people may be sort of delaying NFT drops and all that sort of stuff. I think we're seeing quite a bit of that, and that may continue. But just these people are building these sort of products, and the sort of conditions of how much ETH is sort of irrelevant to those sort of products. I think that's maybe an interesting sort of thing there. That when we have these sort of market corrections, my sort of view is that really sort of kills off projects that haven't sort of found sort of a great level of success. So I think it's potentially quite difficult for games now that have sort of been live for a bit and seen their token price go down 99%, because that sort of dynamic is very hard to overcome. But considering there's many more games, blockchain games in development than there are sort of live at the moment, and of a much higher quality, is that in a sense it's sort of I wouldn't necessarily say sort of positive news, but in a sense it's sort of in the game space we don't really look at what's happening on the price of the sort of day to day. We're much more what are these big games companies doing?
Yeah, totally. Like we pay attention to different metrics, not necessarily tied to the price action. And you mentioned about the investments, which actually I want to put something in perspective. If we compare the current bear season or crypto winter to what happened in 2018, we see similar price actions. We see similarities. Altcoins and most cryptocurrencies losing 90% of their value in a span of months. Massive derail of the crypto market cap. This is similar. But what is really different is the level of attention, the level of interest that the industry is still garnering. At that time in 2018, basically, people that were just getting their hands in the industry were scared about the volatility. So basically, they stopped paying attention to the industry. They didn't want to be involved anymore. To what we see right now is quite different. We see people engaging, and it's games and it's NFTs. So it's really a positive sign and shows how long the industry has matured over these 4 years. And also, I want to highlight at that point, we saw a lot of retail capital, retail investors, basically individuals pouring out their money into crypto projects. Right now, the majority of the investments are coming from VCs and corporate investments. Of course, there are institutional investors as well, but the profile of investors has changed completely. Talking about these investments, actually, a couple of days ago, we saw A16Z, which is basically Anderson Horowitz, committing 4.5 billion to the industry to keep building the space. So if we consider this 4.5 billion, we are talking about almost 10 billions already invested this year. But it wouldn't be fair because it's like double counting, right?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I mean, I think not so much with that particular deal, but I think you have to sometimes be a little bit careful. So, I mean, on a slightly smaller scale, I noticed today that Congregate, the sort of online sort of used to be a sort of web sort of flash game publisher, it's announced a deal with Immutable X. It's like a $40 million sort of ecosystem fund. But that's all sort of the existing token. So I guess it doesn't count as investment. I guess the bigger one was DappRadar announced a $750 million fund. When was that, about a month ago or so ago? And that was there was definitely some new money coming in there from investors. So there was definitely new capital coming in. But obviously DappRadar has raised whatever it's raised $1 billion over several years. So some of that money will have come from stuff that's been invested into DappRadar. So I think you have to be sometimes just a little bit careful of sort of headline figures. And actually, coming back to the Andreessen Horowitz kind of fund, the 4.5 billion into Crypto Fund 4. The other thing to be careful of is not careful, but just to be aware of is that money will have been raised weeks ago, probably months ago. So the fact they're announcing it now isn't like they just raised the money yesterday. So that's stuff that's been in the pipeline for a long time. I guess what will be interesting to see is in the next sort of few months, so maybe after the summer, are any of these funds, are those funds still announcing like $1 billion crypto funds? Because that sort of means they will have been, those are the sort of funds they'll be raising now. So I'm no expert in this, but in my sort of, from what I can gather, I would think it's pretty difficult for crypto VC funds and even games funds to be raising a lot of money at the moment, just because everyone's, if some of these big sort of institutions or pension funds, have a lot of tech stocks, then their portfolio's down 40% anyway, and they're not really want to sell off no one's going to want to sell off Tesla at the moment to invest in blockchain games. That's at a very big level. That's at the big sort of institution. And even it's funny how quickly we become sort of blasé to the fact that there's a $4.5 billion kind of crypto fund, and they only raised a $2.2 billion crypto fund three. Was it? I can't remember when it was. June last year. I mean, it's like, where's all this money going? Incredible times, really. I think we've become desensitized to just how much money is sort of going into this space. But, yeah.
But at the same time, it's baffling for me. Like, we're on a really tight space, a really challenging period for capital markets, for all markets and industries out there, besides probably commodities and energy and food commodities. But it's a tough time. So that's interesting for me that the interest and the capital keep pouring into this space, which I see it as a positive sign.
I think there is just quickly on that point. I mean, there's one sort of interesting thing. I think I sort of just previously argued that the games industry. I mean, there are some people in games industry who obviously clearly hate NFTs and that sort of stuff, but the majority of sort of just businessmen in the games industry now have sort of come to the conclusion that they need to be looking at Web3. So they may really believe it, or they may not get it. But they understand it's new technology they have to look at. But so there's money there, and basically this stuff's being built out, and it's sort of exciting because no one's, I would say, even Axie Infinity, is not. I don't think is the template of what blockchain games are going to be like in a year's time. But what we're seeing now actually is interesting with the sort of tech, with the general tech sort of sell off. We're seeing actually quite a lot of layoffs there. Sort of companies, laying off 10%, 20% of their workforce because they just want to, make sure they've got enough capital. So you've got quite a lot of sort of sort of professional people who work in sort of tech business, coders, biz dev people who are now looking for a job. And because kind of crypto in general and blockchain games in particular, is an area where there is quite a lot of capital. But generally, hiring has been very difficult for those companies. I think you sort of will see it's sort of a switch where you can kind of imagine a lot of people in the sort of Silicon Valley, Bay Area, places like that, sort of going, I need a job. There's not a lot of jobs going for the next few months in sort of general tech startups, but it seems to be quite a lot of money going on in some of these crypto companies. So I think we'll see that will actually accelerate people who don't, they're not people who maybe have NFTs or even own Bitcoin, but they just want a well-paid tech job. And sort of crypto is where those tech jobs are. So I think we'll see an acceleration there, which I think is good for the space because you just don't want these sort of companies to be run by sort of, as much as we love crypto bros and degens, we don't necessarily want those running all our companies. So I think the more professional sort of tech startup people we get into the space as well, I think in the long term that is pretty helpful.
No, I agree with you. This is one of the bullish signs that we are seeing. There is an exodus of talent because really talented people in Silicon Valley, as you mentioned, in Web2 and native companies, and there is an exodus right now happening. Big migration of talent coming to the Web3 space, which of course is totally bullish. Some of these teams are getting formed by this, like you see, former CEO of Google, former chief marketing officer of Facebook coming in to lead an NFT project. So of course, these people know somebody. These people know how to form communities and know how to develop a robust product for the masses. So definitely bullish. Again, as the investments said, same story here with the talent. Only bullish at this point, which is of course great. But moving along with the story, I want to ask you. We see a big shift in the leaderboards this month. We were used to see Axie Infinity month over month getting into easily top 10 position. What are your big takes here? Of course, Axie had suffered the biggest hacking in the history with the running bridge, and we know the consequences. But otherwise, Splinterlands has been at top of the rankings for 7 months. The Wax games, Farmer Worlds, and Alien Worlds have been there at top for a good time. And we see Polygon rising as an ecosystem which is hosting interesting games. What are your takes on the movement in this game, Debs? What are you looking at?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I still think it's sort of interesting that they, considering the amount of sort of games that even to date have been released. I think last time I looked, DappRadar in terms of the total games listing is like 1,500 or something, 1,500.
Yep.
And it's sort of shocking to me, not shocking maybe, but it's still sort of surprising to me how hard it is for blockchain games to sort of gain an audience. So I think I looked 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, and there were I think 50 games with more than 1,000 DAUs on DappRadar's ranking. So that's 50 out of 1,500. So pretty small percentage. And I'm very much of the sort of opinion that I think when we come to blockchain, we'll see sort of fewer bigger successes rather than necessarily a lot of successful games. And I think we sort of see that as you say, there's really a handful of games that have gained what is currently sort of the largest audience. So I mean, I think Axie's clearly going through a sort of transitionary period.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's launched the Origins release, but that's not sort of properly out yet, and it's not got the sort of the tokenomics built into it. So they're on basically a 6-month sort of roadmap to get that game up to they want it. They need to get it to before they launch through the sort of app stores. So that's the big thing for them. They need to get it something to a state where they can launch it, put it through Apple and Google app stores, and then we'll see whether they can sort of fulfill that sort of mass market approach, which is what they're trying to do. They're trying to be a mass market mobile game. So we just have to wait for that. I mean, Splinterlands is interesting. Behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. They just launched their new validators, or launching their new validators. I can't remember yesterday or today, which is not going to impact us as players. But there's a whole bunch of stuff sort of behind the scenes in terms of the tokens and how people might sort of support that game and that sort of stuff. And their land obviously coming on as well. Alien Worlds again. They've got quite a lot. They've got sort of quite an interesting sort of model in terms of how they're sort of building out these sort of planet DAOs, which I think is not as obvious to most people who play that game. But I think all those projects have really interesting roadmaps. But I think for me, sort of the rest of the year is seeing the products from, I guess, what we might call, what I sort of call traditional game makers. So people who just sort of make games up to this point, haven't really made blockchain games. And I just got this list that I sort of keep. It's a live list. If you find me on Twitter, if you want to find out about the link to that list. But now I've got a list of about actually 35 sort of games that I'm sort of quite looking forward to, from blockchain, and those are mainly from people who are traditional game makers who previously made games for console, PC, mobile, and now are making their first sort of blockchain game. So I guess at the moment we've got Phantom Galaxies, Animoca, one of Animoca's studios called Blowfish out of Australia, doing this big sort of third-person mech shooting game, which is actually in alpha. They're just doing their Planet NFT drop today. And obviously there's all the blockchain stuff to it, which some of us are interested in, but for most people, I think they're interested in that game because it just looks like a big flashy shiny PC mech shooter game where you fly around the universe and sort of shooting things, and that's we've not really seen that level of just sort of visual polish and sort of traditional gameplay in blockchain. There's a whole bunch of other sort of similar games. I guess there's stuff like kind of Metalcore, again another sort of mecha game, and Illuvium, I guess, a more sort of crypto game. But there's a whole bunch of these ones sort of coming out, and clearly they won't all be successful. I think with those games coming out, we see the first wave of what do traditional game makers do with blockchain? Do they just put some NFT characters in there, or some of them maybe have a bit of a deeper approach? So that for me is the really interesting bit, because I think at the moment, Axie sort of peaked at 2.7 million DAUs. Splinterlands has got up to maybe 400,000 DAUs, but we know in the traditional game space, the biggest game has 100 million DAUs on mobile. So I think what we're looking for is not every game is going to be a 10 million DAU game, but if we think blockchain games are going to be this sort of disruptive playing games, then you will expect to see sort of several games at a sort of Axie Infinity type DAU, so like roughly 1 million DAUs, however you want to exactly count that. But we would expect over time to see the 5 million DAU game, the first 10 million DAU game. That's probably not happening this year. That's more over a sort of a 3 to 5 year sort of time frame. But this is what we sort of expect to see.
But these traditional, let's say, these traditional gaming development studios, they are getting a lot of backlash from their communities when they try to set up an NFT model running into their games. We saw last year with Ubisoft Ghost Recon's the backlash they got from their community. A couple of months ago, or sorry, a couple of weeks ago, we saw the announcement of Square Enix, the studio behind Final Fantasy, announcing their intentions to go full Web3, basically launching a potential Web3 game. So, what is your opinion here? Is it a good model that Web2, well, let's say traditional gaming studios adapt to their current games with blockchain features, with NFTs and cryptocurrencies? Or are they going to transition into more of a Web3 native studio where probably they will leave their current gaming developments, but probably create a subsidiary or a branch that dedicates specifically, that focuses on blockchain games? What do you think is going to play out?
Yeah. Well, I think every company will sort of have a different approach. I mean, I think the backlash sort of stuff is, I just think it's sort of unsustainable. I mean, I think there are, as with lots of sort of these sort of debates, there are a very small set of very vocal, in some degree principled people who just are very sort of keen to get their sort of communication across. It just happens that I 100% disagree with them. But there is, in the sense that I do find there, I can imagine it is hard for existing games that have been out for a while, and people are playing them and they paid for them and they're liking them or buying stuff in the game, and then this other sort of new monetization sort of option comes in. So I can understand there is that sort of this potential disruption that people may not be happy about. I don't think that's why, as you described, the NFT sort of gaming backlash has happened. I think that's purely for sort of in a sense almost like political sort of reasons that's happened. I think with Ubisoft in particular, I think Ubisoft, basically everything Ubisoft has done over the last 2 years has been criticised. So they've had a whole bunch of internal kind of stuff they've been criticised about. They've been, so I think Ubisoft, I think particularly for these big companies now. So it's not just like Ubisoft has been sort of criticised for stuff. It's Ubisoft. Everyone's all over Blizzard and Activision all the time. EA, everyone hates EA for whatever reasons. I just kind of think these big sort of companies just now attract any single thing they do, in whether it's their games or sort of their stance on sort of social issues. That there's a group of people who just really want to sort of kick up a fuss about them. Sort of mobile companies. So just mobile games just don't get the same grief in the same way that sort of PC console games do. It's ironic, really. Mobile games as a sector is much bigger than PC and console. It's bigger than PC and console games put together. It's growing much faster than PC and console games, and that's really where the sort of the focus of the industry is. If you look globally, where the money is, it's free to play mobile games. But people that come to us, who I guess are best known for Summoner's War, it's a pretty big mobile game, done like $2 billion of revenue. I think, as far as I can tell, every game they're doing now has some blockchain element to it. So some of those games will be horrible to play. I mean, the ones they've put out so far are pretty hardcore. I mean, they were not designed as blockchain games, so they sort of added NFTs into them. I tried to play them. I couldn't. I mean, I was like, I was incapable of sort of getting them. They're very sort of a certain type of sort of grindy, RPG that sort of audience likes. But over time, that they're going to sort of open that sort of stuff out, and there'll be more, I guess, accessible sort of games. And certainly, I think not every blockchain game needs to be fully on chain with a governance token and a DAO, and I think game makers will sort of find out how they want to do that, and different types of audiences will do things in different ways. I think a good example is a game called Castle Crush, which is from a developer called Wildlife Studios. Again, a fairly big mobile game developer, originally out of Brazil. And that game is like it's sort of like a PvP sort of lane-based thing where you're trying to destroy someone else's castle. A good game, so 75 million downloads, got 200,000 DAUs, I think. And basically, if you play that game a lot and you're sort of maxed out your characters, they're going to bring in a sort of option where you can sort of make them NFT versions of those characters. So most people who are playing that game won't sort of access that, but for their really hardcore players. They say there's about 40,000 people who play that game and spend a lot of money in that every day, and they feel like NFTs will give them extra enjoyment in the game. They'll play that game more, and they'll basically get these sort of extra characters, and they'll earn some tokens. And I think that's a sort of a fairly decent model. And I think as we'll see over the next sort of year, there'll be a range of games, from very, very casual sort of games where you do something in the game, you might earn some tokens or get a special NFT that you won some tournament, to the super hardcore on-chain, everything on Ethereum, paying gas fees, sort of stuff that we see a little bit now. And there'll be a whole range of stuff in there, and to a degree, some will work for some audiences, some not for others. And over time, there is still a degree, I suppose, of educating gamers about what an NFT actually is, what a game that runs on a blockchain actually is. And I imagine probably some of the early success will be some of these more casual games where you're sort of just playing the game as usual. You don't need to know what MetaMask is. They have some custodial wallet that handles all that for you. And then people, what I find with crypto, and what I think I find with a lot of people, is once you sort of start to understand it a little bit, either you run away screaming and you don't want anything to do with it because it's too complicated, or you just learn a little bit and you go, oh, that's how it works, and then you try something else and you go, oh, that's how that thing works, and then gradually people sort of find their sweet spot, and setting up a MetaMask account is not easy, but also it's not super complicated as long as you're not doing it. As long as the first thing you're asked to do to play a game is not set up a MetaMask wallet, then people can do that.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Like, it was super interesting to get that perspective. And probably it's just finding out the spot where people lose fear of trying something new, which is probably what we are seeing. This resistance from fear of the unknown. I don't want to interact with my wallet. I don't want to custody my assets myself. So maybe that's the reason. And also interesting for me how the dent that these game studios can make into the industry is a transition between let's call it that way, like this type of archaic game mechanics that we are seeing in most play to earn apps, and how we are going to shift from play to earn to play and earn, basically, where we are finally going to see games like Illuvium, these AAA games, Star Atlas and so on, that are going to take the gaming experience to the next level, when you literally go and play to enjoy and have fun, instead of the backside mechanism of the human psychology that drives you to play because you're going to earn some money. That is also where I think we're going to see a major shift in the industry coming up in the next years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good point, and I would sort of say that the term sort of play to earn is now, if not dead, is certainly not used by a lot of blockchain games companies. So we have the sort of variations, play and earn, or move to earn, or whatever sort of variation we're using. But I kind of think over time that just sort of goes away, and people find a more sort of nuanced way. And actually, while you were saying that, I thought another good part of that sort of education thing, obviously has been with Axie Infinity was the role of guilds. I mean, guilds were really the jet fuel that got Axie to where it was, because it wasn't people rocking up and spending $300 buying Axies and then playing the game themselves. It was they were basically being taught how to do that by people who were already sort of scholars, and then that sort of snowballed. And I kind of think a lot of what happens, I think a lot of how quickly blockchain games are adopted as a mass market thing does come from guilds, because I think guilds have proven to be very successful at onboarding a lot of people. The big problem is they were very set up, I think, quite overly strictly. They play to earn as their business model, and obviously play to earn has sort of gone away as the Axie sort of SLP token has sort of collapsed in value. So at the moment, guilds can't really do what they previously did, because there's no game that can fulfill that. So I know YGG are talking much more broadly. I think they're going a much broader sort of approach. They're talking about sort of learn to earn, and they're basically, YGG obviously came out of the Philippines, has that more sort of focus on developing countries, and they're very much taking like, well, people don't have to play games. There's lots of things we can plug our sort of our scholars or our users into. Doesn't have to be games at all. And that's definitely one strong approach. I think games will always be part of that, but they can go sort of more widely. And I think on the other side, what we're seeing, there's quite a few now, sort of half a dozen projects that have raised some money, and they're a bit more. They're a bit more like, I guess, more for like a Western audience, and they're more like you can if you want to play a blockchain game, you have an account with us, and we'll lend you the NFTs. You'll pay some money up front to get the NFTs and some sort of rental service. So you're sort of almost seeing it like a instead of it's roughly the same business model, I suppose, as guilds, but it's subtly different in the sense that with the guild you basically turned up and you played whatever sort of game was sort of offered to you, and you did what you were told, sort of thing. Whereas this is much more, well, if you want to try Axie Infinity, you can pay $10 and we'll give you like a team and you can try it. And if you want to try Illuvium, then pay $10 and it's almost like a subscription service to blockchain games. And I guess if people really get into one game, they can then sort of go off and buy the NFTs. But it's sort of like a trial system. Now, I personally, I'm not incredibly sure how easy that business model is going to be to scale. I think it has some issues. But there are some very early stages of, as I say, it's half a dozen companies, and they've raised, some of them, quite decent sums of money, tens of millions of dollars, to try and build out that sort of model. And I think that again, that just makes things much easier. Literally, you create an account, turn up, put your credit card in to do this rental model, and then basically all the crypto stuff happens, in the background.
Sounds like Blockbuster.
Well, I didn't want to use the term Blockbuster. I don't know how many people remember Blockbuster anymore.
We're too old already. We're talking about how the term play to earn is fading away. Yeah, I agree with you. We are getting away from this term because, to be honest, it does not necessarily capture the essence of what we try to accomplish with blockchain games. But we are seeing the rise of other type of trends. One that has been one of the hottest in recent weeks is move to earn. And for those of you guys that are not familiar with the move to earn term, basically move to earn are those dApps that reward people with cryptocurrencies based on their physical activity. So you download an app, and using the GPS geolocation of your mobile phones, the app is able to track how many miles you have run, and based on that miles, you can get rewards. Probably the biggest example is Steppen, the most popular one that is running on Solana. But we have a lot of examples like Genopets, Oliver X, Dom Roops, and many, many more. Why, John? Why is relevant for gaming the move to earn? Is this move to earn adding a gamification element to their core business, or why is it important for games?
Yeah. So I think at this early stage, people just want to experiment, and clearly one of the biggest mobile games, certainly of the last kind of few years, has been Pokemon Go, and that's really. People love Pokemon. That's why the game's been such a success. But clearly, this sort of it's something you can't do with other formats. So you can't you can never obviously have a move to earn game on even a location based game on a PC. It'd be a very boring game unless you run around with laptops. It wouldn't work. So I think that there's always been a sort of group of people who've been very interested in location based games, and that seems like something that's really inherent to mobile devices. So, I mean, I've covered mobile games, or looked at the mobile games market for well over a decade now, and the problem with location-based games is that basically people only go to 3 locations. So basically, you live somewhere, you go to work, or used to go to work before COVID. Now you work where you live, and then there's some other social place that you might go, regular places. So actually, location-based games are really hard to do because it was very hard to get people to go somewhere they wouldn't otherwise go. The thing about Pokemon Go was it was brilliant and managed to do that because Pokemon. It made sense to go and find Pokemon, and obviously a lot of people grow up with Pokemon. So I'm always a bit nervous about that sort of thing because Pokemon Go, I find, is the exception that proves the rule about location-based games. So there's been lots of location-based mobile games that haven't worked. Even Harry Potter wasn't a big enough IP to get that to work. I mean, that game was a horrible failure. So I'm a little bit nervous with that background. I'm a little bit nervous about the move to earn stuff. because I just know it is very, very difficult to get those games to work. So I think Stepan, which I mean, I have to say I've not played it, although I have sort of looked at it. I think they're not location based in the way that Pokemon Go is. I do like the idea, the move to earn thing. Maybe not as a term I don't like very much, but I think the ability to get people to physically move around is, I think it's hard to make that work as a game, as in like a traditional sort of type game. I think that Pokemon Go works well. You're not just moving; you're going to locations. You actually have to go somewhere. So the movement bit is sort of indirect, secondary to finding the Pokemon. But the move bit is sort of clearly important in terms of sort of people's health and well-being, and obviously over the last probably 20 years, governments have been desperate to get people to move more, and that's against sort of societal trends that are people are moving much less, which is why we're all less sort of healthy than we might otherwise be. So I think there is something there. I think I'm a little bit nervous about the sort of Stepan's sort of explosive growth is a little bit like Axie Infinity, and everyone sort of piles into the token, and that probably looks unsustainable. But I think there is definitely something in that space, which is how can you build some, I guess we call them sort of gamified experiences. How could you build some sort of gamified health experiences around that? So clearly there's a sort of high concept there that it's really good. Certainly if something on someone's phone could get like 10% of the population of a country moving more, then governments would be over the moon to kind of fund that. But how you actually could connect those two things together, I think is very, very difficult. So my things is the people they appeal to are the people who are already very fit and are already sort of going out for runs and stuff, and they go, I'm going for a run anyway, I'll take this Steppen thing with me, and that really appeals to me. I can get some tokens. But if you can sort of, in the long term, if you can sort of organize these things so people who wouldn't otherwise go for a run are maybe going out for a walk somewhere to, and we have seen, I guess, with things like Fitbits and those sort of trackers. There was certainly in the UK where I'm from, there was a few years ago, there was this sort of rise of popularity where people who weren't really into fitness and wouldn't go to a gym were sort of like, I've got to do my 10,000 steps. And particularly if they shared that sort of stuff socially, they had a group of them where they all, they'd notice if Bob hadn't done his 10,000 steps, and they were, they had the leaderboards. And as human beings, we psychologically quite like that sort of, I think there is definitely something there around that. I'm not sure the current products are necessarily going to be the ones that do that. But I mean, it's the Steppen, I think, is a product that have done kind of well to get to kind of where they have. Clearly, the problem with everything, they go through the same thing as Axie Infinity, where in the beginning stages, some people are a certain group of people are prepared to spend $1,000 to buy an NFT to go and do something, but that's clearly not mass market kind of adoption. So how can you do this? And maybe it comes back to sort of in a sense, guilds. Probably harder to get guilds to quite work in the same way there. And probably in the US, it's often all about sort of health insurance companies who clearly, they already do this. Certainly in the US, I don't know if in other countries, but if your health insurer might give you a Apple Watch or a Fitbit that they can see the data on, and if you prove you're doing 10,000 steps a day, then your health premiums drop. So clearly at that stage, people have a very strong incentive to be active because they're saving money. So I think there are definite sort of good business models and concepts there. Quite how many different sort of agencies and sort of types of businesses you need to pull together to do that is sort of what I think is hard to understand. I think if Nike went in for it, or Adidas or something, you needed one of those sort of bigger organizations to sort of take control of it and sort of drive some of the interconnected parts of it, I guess.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting to see how we can take advantage of from social perspective. You mentioned we were coming from 2 years of basically sit down in front of our monitors, with losing a lot of social interaction, but also losing a lot of physical activity. So maybe Step and the game to earn movement are just laying the blueprint of how a gamification Web3 element can be embedded into other routinary activities. Like, for example, is it probable that we are going to see in the future gamification elements, learn to earn apps, apply to schools, or
Yep.
maybe right to earn or contribute to earn? That it's also a social paradigm. So for me, it's interesting to see if this movement can lay the blueprint for more social activities to come by. And regardless of whether Steppen or Genopets or any of these dApps are going to be successfully and sustainable, it's interesting to me the social paradigm that we're discussing.
Absolutely. And this is not really linked to games, but clearly within sort of blockchain stuff in general, there is quite a strong push towards things like creating allowing people to sort of create an identity that is immutable and can be sort of you can allow other agents to sort of check against, whether that could be you've passed certain exams or whatever.
Yeah.
And obviously blockchain allows you to do that without necessarily giving away information that you wouldn't otherwise kind of want to give away. So it may not be, there's a whole bunch of personal information that is not relevant to your employer. Your employer might care less that you've passed some exams about whatever particular, if you're a doctor, they want to check that you've passed your done your degree and done your training wherever. And I think there is some quite interesting things around that. And clearly, I guess, as gamers, we don't necessarily want our employee to know the amount of hours we've wasted playing games. So that might not be too good. But we might. But if we say, oh, we got to level, level 100 in this game, and we were part of a guild, and you were the treasurer of this guild, and blah, blah, blah. There are things that you can imagine, because people are clearly only going to spend more of their time doing things online and in games and in gamified experiences and metaverses and all that sort of stuff. So there is actually, so I think, again, this is probably a decade off, but there are some interesting things that could be pulled out of, activities in games that are on blockchains could allow people to get jobs that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise get because they didn't go through like I say, formal education system. And certainly, again, thinking about sort of the global reach of economies now, the one thing that YGG and Axie Infinity totally proved was it doesn't matter where you are in the world, as long as you've got a smartphone and access to some NFTs. People in the Philippines were earning at the same rate as people were earning in I don't know, the richest place in the world, Monaco or somewhere. It didn't matter where you were, it was kind of what you were doing. And we've never seen that in sort of human history, so that's quite a sort of fascinating sort of concept, but probably not. Probably a bit long term for this kind of conversation.
Yeah, exactly. We're a good years away, and you were mentioning how, I don't know, like universities or works can use NFTs, but not NFTs, soul-bound tokens. But that's a whole different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So before we close out, I want to ask one last question. It's really intriguing for me. What's your perspective? What are your takes on other side, this interoperable metaverse from Eurolab that it's going to include a playing mechanics and so on? What is your opinion on that?
I'll take it a bit broader. So I think obviously this is playing into the whole metaverse thing, and I think the more I have sort of thought about this and had conversations with people about it, my view is I think we are sort of getting metaverses slightly the wrong way around. So I think I blame Ready Player One. I think that's had much too strong a cultural influence that everyone sort of thinks there's one metaverse that everyone's in, and you put on a headset and off you go into this sort of crazy world. And I just can't, I just can't see that happening, because there's not one of anything that we are involved with. You think of social media, social networks are a network effect thing where sort of there's not very many of them. Normally there's one that appeals to a certain geography or generation, but we've still got, like, a lot globally. We've probably got 20 of them that appeal to different people in different regions, different generations. Clearly, no one under the age of probably 35 is going to touch Facebook these days. We sort of know where these things are. So I think, in terms of other side, I think it is an interesting sort of play. Clearly, Bored Apes is a cultural phenomenon. Quite how wide that is outside of sort of crypto, I would sort of be a little bit unsure about. So I don't think, if you show people an ape, I think a certain subset of people, maybe 100 million, even not 100 million wouldn't know. But anyway, so I think the other side is an interesting opportunity. I think they're riding their sort of their ability to raise money and their ability for people to kind of get into sort of situations. They've done that very well. I mean, they clearly are very skilled at doing that. And I think the company they've partnered with in the UK called they've been building sort of these very big, scalable, uncharted world technologies for, I don't know, getting on for 10 years now. I mean, not been very successful in the game space to date, but they do quite a lot of stuff with sort of defense now. And I think if anyone,
you mean
improbable, yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's really interesting, and we've never really seen anything live using that sort of tech at scale. I mean, whether other side will do a good version of that. I mean, building those sort of things as games is that takes hundreds of millions of dollars and hundreds of people and years. So I don't think that's not going to suddenly pop up and be a metaverse. So more my thinking really is on a metaverse is I think stuff like the sandbox, which I've always been sort of quite interested in. I call it, and I don't mean this in a sort of nasty way, but I sort of call it my first metaverse. That's sort of how I see it. That it's not. It has many of the elements. I think it has the crucial elements you need in a metaverse, which is basically some level of user-generated content and openness and blockchain. Clearly, it's not going to be a massive, big sort of tech platform, but people are going to basically anyone is going to be able to create their own little sort of experiences and maybe charge for them, or maybe just have their friends there. We've seen this stuff before. There's been Habbo back in the day. There's obviously Roblox, Minecraft. The sandbox is not a generational leap from that, but it's the first one of these sort of things we've seen. It's obviously not live yet. We don't quite know when it's going live, but I can kind of see, particularly with the crossovers and the collaborations that are going to have, there's something. I think something interesting will come from that. In the long term, though, I think more the metaverse stuff. The stuff that will really sort of pay out over the next 10 years is going to be quite weird stuff that bubbles up from the bottom. So all the ones we're looking at now, so certainly Other Side and certainly the Sandbox, and even stuff like Decentraland, which is a bit more sort of open. These are still sort of I would call them sort of top-down initiatives. So you sort of you even in terms of visual look, there is a certain visual look there. I think the stuff that's going to pan out is going to be weird stuff that sort of bubbles up from the bottom, that is sort of really messy. Maybe probably doesn't even have a visual look to begin with. It has maybe some NFT primitives. I mean, there's a few projects. I'm not an expert in this space at all, but there's a few projects sort of trying to do that. And I think I can imagine over periods of time, those things, they don't need millions of users to begin with. They just need a few thousand users. They can sort of build up probably some sort of tech stack you would probably need there, some sort of standards. They'll build up some sort of level of capital, whether that's their own sort of token that they've launched, or NFTs, or VCs, or all of the above. And you sort of have this thing that people are sort of using, but it's certainly not an AR headset you're putting on and seeing this sort of beautiful, sort of colourful world. It's sort of a weird thing where people are just, I wouldn't even better sort of explain what they're doing, but it's maybe various little games, but the whole point is it's open, so other people can sort of bring things in. So I'm really not explaining it very well. I mean, a good example, so it's quite well known in the blockchain game space, is this thing called Treasure DAO, which has been knocking around for a while. I'm not saying Treasure DAO are the ones who are going to fix it, but or create the metaverse. But I think that sort of approach where it's very sort of open, and you sort of have this more collaborative situation, and teams who are not associated with you can sort of just rock up and do things with the sort of the tokens or the NFTs that are already there, or maybe launch their own tokens, or and there's just sort of something quite messy there. And most of those things clearly are going to fail or not go mass market. And I think the other thing you probably do need for a metaverse in the true sense of the word is a metaverse isn't something that 100 people go to and spend all their time in. It has to have that sort of network effect going on there. So I think it is quite more, but I think we are looking at it, and certainly that up to this point I've sort of been looking at it sort of the wrong way round, thinking it's something that sort of needs to be imposed, but I think it needs a much sort of longer gestation period.
Pressure though. That's a new one for me, to be honest. Like I need to research that.
There's always
Um,
more research. That's the problem.
yeah,
I'm sure there's people in the audience who know a lot more about this sort of stuff than me. So I'm actually not saying I'm an expert in this thing, but just my sort of thinking
fair
up to
enough.
this point.
Fair enough. Good people. We have got 10 minutes. Anything you want to ask, John or myself? Feel free to shout. Last minutes before we close this space. Please don't be shy. And in the meantime, just closing out the other side the discussion. For me, it's interesting that they are backed up by Animoca. Of course, we know that Animoca has been focusing a lot recently on developing and investing blockchain games. They own the sandbox. They
True.
own they own Gaming, which is developing also blockchain games. They just received 450 million investment from them. They have a lot of capital to work with. So it's going to be interesting if they can nail the MMORPG where thousands of users using their avatars from different projects, which is truly an interoperable metaverse. If they can nail that down with the improbable technology, I think that game could scale quite quickly. To be honest,
I
because
guess I would
it's not
say
something that we are going to see only for blockchain games, but it's something like literally innovative that it's going to be beyond the blockchain space. It's something that it's not done so frequently with other games.
I guess the question for me, sort of related question, is what are we actually going to do in the metaverse? And I think that's sort of, you know, I think that's where something like Fortnite isn't really a metaverse because there's sort of specific stuff you do in it. I think but I think you don't just, and a bit like Decentraland at the moment, you sort of rock up there and there's sort of no one there, and you don't know what, you sort of walk around, don't know what to do. So I think that's quite a difficult, delicate sort of balancing act because the point of being a metaverse is there's obviously something you need to do there, and it needs to have sort of depth. So some people will be really heavily involved in some really maybe nerdy thing that most people don't care less about, but you can do that in there. But most people will just sort of, what do most people do on Facebook? They just sort of see what their people that they know are eating for dinner or whatever, And some people have massively strong debates about, I don't know, subatomic physics or something, So I think with the metaverse, that's the sort of thing that because that sort of drives what people, why people will spend time in there, and I think it's that difficult thing. There needs to be some very specific things people will want to do, or maybe sort of situations people can create. But in general, for people who just are not very bothered about stuff, they still want to be there as well. So that's that's quite difficult. Well, I don't think an MMORPG isn't going to be a metaverse because most people don't play MMORPGs, do they? So I think
yeah. For me, it's a very philosophical question, to be honest.
it does get a bit like that, doesn't it?
Yeah. But we can narrow down activities. Well, of course, I think the metaverse is going to be a place where you're going to socialize, you're going to have fun, and you're going also to start generating revenue because we know that fashion brands and retail brands are putting their sites in the metaverse. So they are going to find ways to make us go in there and spend money and get revenues from them. They are experts at that, and they are going to get us go inside a metaverse, spend 4 or 5 hours, spend a few dollars every day, and they will be happy. So I think it's a bit yeah. I mean it's a bit of a dilemma because on one part, yeah, you're losing basically your physical life, but it's I mean it's unthinkable to think that uh, we are not heading that way. So there are of course always a glass full empty and glass half full, but yeah, I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. It's what we know, and this is where we are heading. So let's be prepared for that journey, I could say. Good. So I don't think we'll have any questions, and time is running out. So I want to give a big thanks to all of you for being valuable members and active members of our DappRadar community. And of course, John, I want to thank you for being here with us today, for sharing all of your valuable insights, and it's been a great discussion as always. Happy to have you here.
No,
And
always enjoy it. Invite me back again.
any, yeah, of course. Any advice for people out there listening? Any closing remarks?
uh, that's quite general, isn't it? Any advice for people? Don't look at CoinGecko for the next couple of days. No, I mean I think more generally, my view on this sort of stuff is, this is a really big transitional change, certainly for the game space. So there's an enormous amount of stuff that is yet to come. So I don't think people should be sort of. I think people should be excited about the future. I say we've really seen sort of 1% of what's going to happen. A lot of the stuff that's going to come is not going to be very good, because that's just how early stage industries work. But I think for me the thing that keeps interesting me is that the most successful games using blockchain, however you want to describe those, it's going to be an entirely new form of gaming. And I think that's it's going to be a fascinating kind of combination of gameplay and enjoyment and socialization and monetization, all these things that we've just it's going to be they're going to be the best games that we've ever played. So that's really something to look forward to.
No, thank you. We have one question actually before we jump out. BCF, what's up, man? What's your question?
Yeah, hi. Nice to be here. I just had a question regarding like what most people's. I think that not everyone can be in a metaverse. You have people out in the world just doing real life things, and what's the possibility of somehow being able to capture that and incorporate that value, that potential value, into a play to earn platform? Does that make any sense? Like say you've got I don't know, people painting, trades,
Yeah.
chefs, whatever. And I know that it kind of it's kind of like along the lines of a step-in app. But is there any potential for being able to have a general application where you can capture that value from people that maybe they want to be involved, they see the technology and where it's going and how it's evolving, but they can't necessarily switch gears to start something altogether different, or eat up 4 hours of their day playing being in a metaverse?
That's a good question, because I'm struggling to think of an answer. I mean, I do. I guess it's not quite answering your question, but I do think, as an aside, that what we will see is bizarre people earning lots of money doing what seems like very bizarre things in what we might call a metaverse. So I think that we already see, they're not quite metaverses, but there's already sort of people who cut hair in online sort of community, and that sort of stuff is super weird, because they're not actually I can't remember which one it is, but I was chatting to the developer about it, and they're not actually clearly cutting hair, because you're a digital 3D avatar, but you basically all they're doing is switching out digital assets. So you turn up with a mohawk and you come out with big flowing locks or whatever it is, but what people are paying for is this sort of service. So you sort of come into this space which has been designed, and obviously most people go to the hairdressers to obviously get their hair cut, but the reason they choose the hairdresser is probably they like the hairdresser, and the hairdresser asks them, traditionally in the UK, where you go on holiday or whatever the thing is. So the service thing is there. So people are actually sort of having this sort of conversation with someone while their hair's being cut in some sort of game world. And I think we'll see sort of more of that. So I'm not quite sure about your question of if people are literally stuck in the real world, can there be some sort of matching of that activity in a metaverse, and quite how sort of that would work out in terms of like a value flow. I mean, I'm sure there is, but I off the top of my head, I can't think that will be the case. But I think is maybe not full-time roles, but more people sort of earning sort of side hustle money, doing what seems like very strange things, in these sort of online universes. And maybe that haircutting is a bad example because it's actually like a real world thing that you're sort of taking into a sort of an online metaverse. But there'll be other super weird things. I know, struggling to think, but the things that sort of the activities that are in the metaverse. So you'll be paying people for those sort of speed up those services or optimize those services or catch you about I don't know. Well, and I think that's sort of the weird thing that as soon as for me, the thing we haven't had with metaverse yet is basically an online situation where there is an internal economy which underpins all the value flow in that world. So there could be very expensive things going on there. There could be very small microtransactions going in there, and but all the participants will get a rightful sort of share of that. And I think just as we see, I mean, even in the real world now, we see probably 20 years ago, imagining people would have a job as a full-time dog walker, which just seemed bizarre to people, but that's quite common now, isn't it? So I think we'll see those sort of quite weird service jobs turning up.
No, and just to complement that idea, the metaverse is also going to generate new wave of jobs. People that own a parcel in the sandbox but are not necessarily skilled to design their own, let's say, roller coaster are going to hire some designer in Fiverr or some of these marketplaces, and they are going to pay them just to complete a specific work. We're also going to see digital real estate agents. We're also going to see artists that are going to dedicate their time to curate digital museums. So it's going to be a new wave of jobs. It's going to be a new way of socialize. And the lines between the physical and the digital are going to begin to blur slightly, but still there are going to be people that are only going to spend time in the physical, not going to want to be spending any minutes in the metaverse. You're of course there's going to be people like that, but the important thing here is we're going to see new ways of economic jobs and economic opportunities inside there, which is exciting.
I agree. I see a mix of the two being important.
Yeah, exactly. Like as John as John said, like I think Ready Player One totally gave us a misconception. Hopefully in 10, 20 years we are not living in a dystopian world as Steven Spielberg and Ernest Cline pictured. So hopefully that's not the situation, and we are only getting inside a metaverse just to have fun and gather out with friends. So it's a combination of the two, what we are probably going to see play out in the next 5-10 years.
I agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. And that is all for today. Unfortunately, time's run out. But again, I want to thank everyone for being active in our community. Thank you again, John, for being with us today. We will see you again in down the line. And remember, each week at the same time, Market Movers discussing different trends and topics affecting the crypto market, and the DappRadar Meet session, where Ian Kane talks down with relevant blockchain projects in his AMA weekly events. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and social media channels, Twitter, Discord, Instagram, and YouTube. And that would be all for today. Wish you guys a lovely evening and have an amazing weekend. See you next time. Bye-bye.